Hey there, welcome to this fully narrated real-time tutorial. We're gonna draw this fantasy girl who is a character from a comic I once created called Ara. I'm gonna draw her in a little bit more of a realistic style here just for fun. Hang out with me while we draw this from start to finish. Let's get started. Alright, my name's Tim McBurney and I've been a professional artist for 20 years and a professional drawing teacher for 10 years, and I'm here to help you draw cool stuff from your imagination, to embrace the challenge of drawing and to master the craft of line and color illustration. Now, as I said, this is going to be a real-time fully narrated tutorial. I'm just showing you a bit of sped up material while I do the intro here. If this style is something that you're interested in, the comic book, bande dessinée, manga style where we're using line and color to create worlds, if that's something you're interested in, go check out my free quick start guide that goes over the basics of how to create your own simple line and color process and workflow in Photoshop. Other than that, let's jump into this tutorial. All right, let's draw something. So we're gonna target a quicker image here. And as a process of that, I'm just gonna pick a simpler image. So I feel like a big part of getting your regular sketching and an art ritual and artwork in is very much linked to controlling how much time you sort of spend on each sort of piece. And again, a big part of that is understanding how you sort of manage that time, right? And getting used to sort of doing a particular amount of stuff in a particular amount of time. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm just going to do some sort of drawings of a character using the Ara character from my sort of fantasy book that I created. And again, just going to do some sort of quick sketching, playing around with some different poses. Now, again, this is something where, you know, we don't always have to, you know, always draw sort of structurally, because in some cases, you know, the image is kind of pretty simple, but I'm still going to be trying to, you know, construct out the face a little bit. But again, I'm also not sort of necessarily worrying about doing a thumbnail or anything like that. Just going to sort of play around. And again, a big part of optimizing the time that you spend on something is realizing, how much time do I have for thumbnails? How much time do I have for different elements of the creative process? Now, what I'd suggest is just sort of getting, you know, if you are aiming for that sort of, you know, 1 hour sort of image, which is sort of what I'm doing here, it can be good to just, you know, like maybe have a couple of passes. So, you know, I'm going to keep this stage pretty loose. And, you know, that way, again, if I don't sort of like what gets created, I will just sort of throw it away and start again. Just a matter of thinking about the shapes that are there. Now, this is also something that I've drawn before, so I'm not going to be sitting there struggling with the, you know, the what am I drawing. I've got a pretty good idea what I'm drawing. I've got a pretty good idea how I'm going to draw it. So it's mainly just a matter of sort of thinking about a pose that kind of feels right. And again, just sort of cruising through. So again, I can use the digital process here to scale this up, or, you know, rearrange it, right? You know, we can sort of move this around. Just playing around with that sort of sketch. And again, the main thing I'm looking for is just, you know, is this going to be remotely interesting? You know, is this going to justify the amount of time I'm sort of working on it, and getting the intent there, right? That intent and expectation for how detailed is this going to be? How much time sort of should I spend on it? What am I going to use this for? All those sort of things. So again, those are the things I'm kind of thinking about or reminding myself of as I go into this. So yeah, just sort of roughing that in. And then yeah, let's think again. I've sort of got, so I've got a drawing here, and it's pretty, like, I feel like it's kind of okay, right? So if we flip, you can see, yeah, it's getting a little bit, to me that looks a little bit sort of tilted now. So this is where, again, I feel like the gesture is kind of working right, but let's just true this up. Because again, I didn't start with a lot of structure, as I sort of said. Let's think about where center is. So you can see there, again, that sort of nose is probably not 100% on center, right? It was kind of, yeah, a little bit sort of further back. So again, find that center line of the forehead. We can sort of trace that along the nose. And then again, I've got the ball of the mouth there. And you can see again, those lips that I drew they're not really on it, right? They're not really where. So you can sort of, I could sort of play around with this, right? Just sort of move them. Again, digital art is really good at that. Or, you could just kind of erase it, right? Like whatever feels right. But you can see that again, I did need to sort of true up that drawing. And that's because, as I said, I was starting it just trying to find sort of a posture, something that kind of feels a little bit sort of interesting. And, that can often be the number one challenge. Now, the concept of truing up a drawing, I think, is really important. It's an important skill to have. And really it is just doing exactly what I just showed you, where I sort of flip it and I notice like, oh, this is a little bit wobbly, right? And the point at which I noticed that is I was gonna put in these horns, and I realized I didn't really have a good indicator for like sort of how to place the connection between the sort of horn that I'm going to draw and the head there. So, then I sort of started looking for some sort of structure and realized, oh, maybe there's not as much structure there as I would like. And then again, sort of like keep pursuing that, keep thinking about the form, and you start sort of chasing stuff around. But again, it all hinges on center. Center line is where you're going to find a lot of the solutions to those problems. Right, find the center, find the symmetry, keep flipping, and again, let's have another go at placing that ear. Right, let's think about on the other side, right, where's that ear going to sort of start? Again, if we sort of draw a line, right, sort of across there, you can see that's sort of where that ear needs to sort of be kind of starting and stopping a little bit. It always feels like it sort of looks a little bit cooler if it sort of goes out a bit more, but again, that's not structurally going to be always the case. And again, just refining the character, the jaw line, right? I felt like that jaw was like a little bit sort of strong. Right, and then again, I'm going to drop down these earrings, make sure, again, if we think about where the lobeless ear nevertheless is sort of where the earring is going to be attached to, where is that? Right, again, I think it's going to be there, so let's drop that down, let's carry that across, erase that, bam, let's sort of put that in. So yeah, we can sort of see that happening. Think about where the center of that kind of hair there is going to be. And again, that's sort of going to come down here, come up. And again, let's sort of draw in where roughly we think her hood and cape are going to be. Let's put some of that sort of neck musculature in. Now, I might not actually ink or do finished lines for a lot of that musculature of the neck, but again, putting it in here does help me to find some of those things. Again, we could probably maybe like move that neck up a bit. Again, I tend to have a habit of drawing necks a little bit sort of long. And again, what we're going to do is find, right, like a line across there, sort of starting at that bottom of the neck. And I'm going to use that again to kind of place some sort of shoulders. Let's find center here. And again, we'll sort of think about how big that rib cage is. Now, this is where proportion can be really useful. So I know that from a head proportion standpoint, if we think about her head, right, being one proportion, right, roughly there. Again, get it right. Right, so this is sort of one head proportion. Well, we know that another one of those head proportions down is going to sort of give us roughly where the breasts are gonna sort of lie. Again, might be a little bit lower, might be a little bit higher depending on sort of anatomy, right? But that's going to give us like a pretty good indication of proportion. And we know that another one of those head proportions down, again, I'm just moving it up so we can sort of see that, right? So we go 1, 2, right? Sort of 3 down here. That's where, again, the bottom of this rib cage is going to be. So I can start with the head as long as I know, right? Again, I'm not working my way down and just kind of hoping for the best. And I don't need to place this anywhere because it's just a disembodied floating head. So again, I can just sort of play around like this. Again, it does, to me, it highlights often the lack of structural challenges that accompany just drawing sort of disembodied faces, right? Which is something you often sort of see, art influencers these days do, is just sort of draw faces and stuff. And you really do find that will give you a lot of bad habits, right? A big one of those is, again, just sort of starting at the head and, hoping you sort of get everything else right, not thinking about some of those larger structural issues. But again, if we understand structural drawing in general, we can, sort of understand those proportions, right? And then sort of figure out where those things are going to be. And again, that stops us from doing silly things like, drawing the breasts too, sort of too far up or too down low. Maybe sort of drawing an arm and not really getting it in the right position. And, what you'll notice is in order for me to sort of track a lot of this structure, I actually need to understand where the center line of the torso is. And where the center line of the torso is very much related to kind of the overall shape of it, right? And where those sort of ribs go. So understanding where the bottom of the rib cage is actually helps me to draw stuff up here because it helps to refine where that center line is. Right, if we think about just finding some of the form on that rib cage, there we go. So again, if I find center, that's going to help me place the breasts so that they're sort of symmetrical from sort of side to side. So again, this one sort of needs to come in probably a little bit. And that one probably needs to go out a little bit. So it's just these little things, right, sequentially going through, sort of finding these, these sort of different bits and pieces that will sort of really help. Again, and I can have a pretty good understanding that, the elbow is going to be sort of lower down here, right? So, not going to see that elbow. And actually, another good sort of tip that you'll often find is, again, just sort of placing, again, even if we sort of don't see anything under here, understanding the proportion, for instance, of where those sort of deltoid shoulder muscles go can be sort of very useful, right? So understanding them proportionally, like where do they end? And again, you're going to see it's going to be, I think again, I'm not 100% sure, but I often find they can line up pretty well with that sort of second proportion, right? So deltoids are going to sort of be a little bit in line with the kind of nipple line, right? So again, or one head, right? One head proportion below the chin. That's sort of roughly where those sort of deltoids are gonna stop along the arm, sort of attached there. Again, might be a little bit under, but they're not going to be sort of up here, right? I think it can be really easy to accidentally make a mistake like that, right? And again, all of those are linked to just proportion. So I'm not putting in a lot of these lines all the time, but I'm thinking of these proportional lines all the time. Again, I feel like this ear here, I just feel like it needs to be out a little bit more. Again, I'm going to make both a little bit bigger. All right, so again, we can think about the structure of where that cape / hood is going to be. And right, we typically kind of have with her, there are these circular sort of rings that are used to kind of connect this cape to the sort of top that she has. And again, I kind of line them up by drawing that line behind the neck. So again, we can draw that through, make sure that line is going to go there. And we're going to see those folds of cloth follow along there. Right along there. Right along there. So these folds in here are going to be the interior of the cloak, and then around here, right, it's going to be sort of the fur lining of it. And again, I'll just sort of put in some of that sort of structure so you can kind of see what I'm doing. Although probably I just sort of wing that, right, and see if I can, if I was doing it just sort of by myself, I'd probably just sort of wing that in. And again, lastly, we're going to have the back of the cloak, right, that's sort of going to go back here and fold down, right. So again, if we were to draw that cloak through, right, all of these bits here are sort of coming up, and that cloak, again, that fur lining is probably going to be a little bit more there, right, and the back of the cape or the cloak, whatever we want to sort of call it, right, is going to wrap around there. So again, just, and probably that thing is like a little bit sort of lower, right? So again, it can be easy, and this is why it's always dangerous, right? We can think of structure. We can think of like, well, this is sort of where it would be, and, you know, sort of put it in, but then step back and say, is that structure actually in the right spot, right? Because it's not just a matter of sort of, you know, does the drawing make sense from a structural standpoint? It's like, you know, does that match the character? And it can be very easy, especially when you're sort of starting to draw a little bit more structurally, to get a bit sort of focused on the structure and to kind of forget about the other things which are sort of important. So again, just thinking about where we sort of position this, right? Like how much of this character do we actually have there? Maybe have this kind of arm going up. So again, just sort of tweaking things, sort of erasing, adjusting lines. Yeah, I just think that sort of cloak doesn't need to be, and the hood doesn't need to be quite that big. hair kind of comes down. Right, some of it is going to come here. But I think, again, the iconic view of her hair is that it sort of goes back, right? So again, it kind of comes back behind there. Now again, let's flip this again. I still have a feeling that some of that structure, right, is not quite right. So yeah, if we flip, yeah, I'm like, well, I like the vibe of it a little bit better from this sort of angle. I'm going to start a new version of the file. We'll put it up on the monitor above me, just so I can double check those things and keep paying attention to that as we go. So again, just thinking about, again, trying to lower this sort of fur lining a little bit. I just feel like that's getting a bit big. And also, again, you know, I feel like these, part of her design is that she has these kind of wide shoulders. I feel like that is kind of important because, again, I've probably designed it so that this cloak can kind of fit over there. And yeah, I think that's like an important bit. Now again, we could try, again, like, should we make it a little bit sort of smaller, maybe like that? Again, that feels very kind of like static, but maybe just having a bit more stuff in there will be sort of useful. Have some sort of travel pack on her back there. And yeah, I mean, I feel like that's probably right as good as we're going to get. Right, let's just make sure we've sort of got, again, this line kind of working. So you've got that kind of rib cage here. So again, just thinking about the structure, I find it's always better to kind of draw the structure in, you know, like put it in. You know, it often means these kind of drawings look a little bit sort of analytical. But yeah, I always find that kind of makes the next stage, right? That kind of inking, finish line stage a lot kind of easier. So there we go. Got that. And again, gonna put some sort of necklace on there. Now I've lost these, right? Lost these earrings here. Let's see if we can put them in. And the earrings do make a difference, right? They really do affect the character. So again, this here just keeps being, right, keeps being higher than that one. For some reason, that's what I sort of keep trying to do. again, that's one of those things where like I know my brain is kind of wrong there, right? Because I feel like, yeah, these ears totally don't go back that much, right? I think they're much more like that. Now again, I've kind of forgotten she's got horns, which often happens, right? You get so used to drawing a character, kind of forget things. And again, it's tricky to, she's got to stay this way because that is the eye with the eye patch. So I've got horns going this way and that way. And again, in a similar way, we're going to line those up. All right. The original design I did of this character had the horns being a little bit more sort of round, but I just found that is just a total, actually, it seems like it'll be very easy to draw. It actually ends up being very challenging for some unknown reason. All right. So there we go. All right, so let's try create some sort of finished lines on top of this, and we'll use those to do a more polished sort of colored drawing. So again, I've got a pretty big brush here. Let's make a new layer. I'm not sure whether this is going to be too big. But I don't know, I kind of like it. How big is this canvas? It's 4,000. I think this will be enough, but again, it's gonna affect the sort of style of the image a bit, right? It'll make it a little bit more cartoony. Frown. Let's have another go at that. I feel like let's put some shadow under that. And the hair outline there. So again, you know, depending on the style, right, that you're using, you can get away with all sorts of things here. Again, I'm just sort of gonna treat that sort of line as if it's sort of straight. And I've got some sort of, we have this kind of strange, might have to take that up a little bit, at this kind of connection point, right, where the horns meet the head. Again, I'm going to put some. Now, I feel like, again, this, I'm remembering that I often actually have this pen set a little bit, right, a little bit fainter, which allows me to, so I'm just going to like sort of take this back, and that allows me to sort of go over and treat it a little bit more like a pencil sort of drawing, right? Again, the using a brush and getting these things right is so important. It's all about the subtlety, right? Exactly how you kind of like to draw. So that one before, where I just had it at 100%, just sort of feels very final to me, right? So it does really feel like sort of a a one and done sort of inking style, which again is kind of fine, right? If that's kind of what you're doing. But again, I like a sort of a pencil style of drawing, right? Where I can kind of, I can do that, right? I can sort of build it up a little bit, create some depth, right? Create some sort of texture to things. And again, I feel like it almost sort of gives me a few passes to each line. Whereas sort of what I had before was, again, very sort of final. And again, those subtleties are really, really important for you. Got to know what type of, do you just want it to be one and done? Again, or do you want to kind of build it up a little bit? There's no right or wrong. It's all just about what you are used to, what you like doing. All right, so here we can sort of see that the ear is still bothering me. So it's kind of. And it's partly because I'm sort of thinking about what the original design was, right? And so it's like I'm a little bit put off just being able to say, oh, that looks cool, because part of me is trying to get it right. You know what I mean? Let's put in these. I don't know what these earrings are or what they're made of or anything. It's kind of like a square box. Now this one, let's actually get rid of that. This one, I think probably just needs to be a little bit, it's not quite a mirror of the other one. All right, put a little hole in it, will indicate that there is some sort of thread wrapping around there and going up right in there. Think about putting a bit of some sort of shading or shadow underneath that ear there. That hair's going to go down here, but I want this one to kind of be overlapping. This one back here is going down there. Same thing with this, right? We've got this one going down here. This one going down here. This one going there. All right, show a bit of that depth there. And get this neck going there. Now again, I can see this on the other monitor, so I'm not quite as knee-deep in it as it may appear. Very dangerous to do drawing at this sort of size when you can't see anything. I think that's one of the major things you need to get used to if you're sort of doing digital art, right? It's just sort of understanding how important it is to get a whole view of your image, right? Something that naturally happens whenever we're drawing traditionally, but you kind of have to make it happen if you're doing it digitally, right? Again, so I've got the other view on the other monitor, which kind of saves me, right? Saves me from making hideous mistakes. So this is a good example of where I like having the extra sort of build up, right? Is I can kind of push some of these like sort of secondary little sort of marks here, right? And sort of build a bit more form that way. I can sort of try and sort of softly trace the form of those kind of lips, right? And yeah, just kind of play around with that. I can also, maybe put in a bit of cheekbone. And again, that's going to be not quite as harsh and strong as if I was doing it, with sort of just ink. Again, it's just how my brain works, right? All right, so let's see if we can rough in this fur lining. Doop, doop, doop. Doop, doop, doop. Bam, bam. Make that darker. And again, that's something where I would, if I didn't have a second monitor, I'd sort of be zooming out to check kind of what that looks like. I think here, again, going to be able to get away with it. Again, I'm just going to sort of put some sort of random sort of marks here to kind of indicate that, again, this is kind of moving a little bit into shadow. And kind of a good way of explaining what's happening there is I'm kind of losing the edges, right? I'm losing the edges over there. Same thing here. Again, we've got some sort of creases going down here, and I'm just going to kind of put a bit of texture in there. Just sort of modifies the feeling of what that fabric might look like. But, it's a very sort of subtle effect, right? And again, all of those things are very sort of personal, right? It really sort of depends on exactly what you want your sort of art to look like and how stylized it is and how you sort of get different textural effects like that. All right. So again, just going to sort of indicate a little bit that the neck form, right, is kind of moving in front of that sort of trap there. Yeah, again, we could sort of, lose these edges back here as well if we wanted. So it sort of means like this stuff back here is kind of just all fading into the background. And again, if I just push this earring forward, right, that's coming forward a bit. Push this one forward. This is coming forward a bit. Now, one of the things that you do, obviously, if you were put a bit of sort of texture or something on there, one of the things you would do if you are working with a sort of one and done harsh ink line, where again you don't have the ability to build up, is you would kind of want a brush or something. You'd want a brush or some other tool that kind of allowed you to vary the thickness of that line or the quality of that line potentially. Which is similar to kind of what I'm doing, right? I'm re-emphasizing some of those lines. I'm sort of de-emphasizing some of them, but I'm doing it in a little bit more of like a tonal drawing way versus sort of purely abstract sort of ink way. Hopefully that makes sense. Again, if you're sitting there going like, what are you talking about, Tim? I have no idea. Hit me up in the comments and say, this was not clear. You were rambling about something, because anyone who knows me knows that I am apt and ready to ramble at all times. And, often I'm just kind of, I get confused and I'm sort of talking about, I'm drawing, and so my brain kind of drifts off and I don't finish sentences when I'm doing these real-time narrated sort of demos. So yeah, if I'm not 100% clear, it's probably my fault, and you are more than welcome to say, hey, dude, what were you talking about there? Explain that more. More than happy to do that. So I'm going to see how this looks, but I'm going to try and like make it feel a little bit like, again, the skin here is getting sort of a little bit sort of pushed by those her sort of armband. And so again, this is a case where I've sort of drawn the whole sort of deltoid, right? But I and again, I haven't sort of drawn the separation, because the deltoid is kind of three muscles. You've sort of got this muscle, and you sort of got that one, and then there's another one sort of behind it. But I've sort of drawn in more structure there than I'm going to put in with the line, right? So again, that line kind of comes down there, and I've certainly again, not always going to ink all of it. And that's kind of what I was saying before, right? Like you put in the structure. We don't necessarily need to 100% of the time draw all of it in for the finished line. And that's one of the real benefits to, again, having like that sort of multi-stage process, right? Is you can kind of really work the anatomy on one of them, and then you can just sort of figure out which bits of it you want to sort of show and highlight from a form perspective. So again, I'm not sure that is right from a on model standpoint. I was like, oh, maybe I'll fix it later. No, I think I'll fix it. So the problem is really simple, is that this, right? So this is where we can go back, right? This is a really sort of easy, simple trick, is like if you get your drawing wrong and it's still on a separate layer, let's just, and if you're using the same brush, you can see I'm now selected that layer, right? I can readjust the sketch drawing. If I go here, I can sort of do the finished drawing. So the problem here is that I feel like this arm is kind of coming at us a bit, right? But I drew those like really simple and two-dimensional. So let's do the obvious thing and give these some dimension. And then the other thing is like, yeah, I feel like they could be a bit bigger. Chunk, right? Chunk. There we go. I also feel like, yeah, they could go there a bit. Boom. Right. And again, I'm going to sort of think about this bicep starting to come in a little bit over there, and that'll hopefully make things a bit better. Let's have another crack at that. All right, we've got 1, 2, it's coming there, it's coming there. It's coming there. Again, this needs to come further out. Further out, go there, bam, 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 bam. All right, that looks, to my eyes, 1 billion times better. Everything has structure. Even a piece of paper has structure. Got to add it all. So again, that's just an example. That's like I sort of missed that in the drawing. I was just sort of like, oh yeah, those things go there, and that'll all turn out. Oh. No, it won't. That'll be a giant mess, and it won't turn out at all. All right, so again, this thing comes over here. Now, I've drawn these stupid's a harsh word, but I've drawn these friggin' rings so many times, and all I'd say is, if you're designing your character that you have to draw for a comic, doing it for a video game is completely different. If it's for a comic, don't put this type of detail in here, especially if you're aspiring to like a simpler style. I think a big part of what, and that's just because they're a pain to draw, right? That you kind of have to get the feeling that like this cloth is kind of wrapping around, and it's just extra drawing that we don't need, right? There's probably a better way to kind of solve that. But anyway, a great signal that you have designed a good character for a comic book is that it is fun to draw, that every sort of part of it is fun to kind of tackle. And I think a lot of the reason you see people do so much fan art perhaps is because people are sort of, you know, attracted to those great sort of comic book characters and sort of animated, you know, TV show characters where, you know, someone really has figured that out. You know, they have kind of created a nice character that's kind of sort of easy to draw. So here again, whoop, keep pressing the wrong button. So yeah, that's kind of, because you can see again, I've got my center line here. Boop. Got my center line, and the breasts are not sort of equidistant. Now again, question, does anyone care? Probably not. But I care. So again, there's a bunch of solutions you could kind of have. Now, are these symmetrical? Well, not really. Like this ring is kind of a little bit further away from, right? Like this one is closer to the center than this one, it feels like. Again, there's a whole bunch of different ways we could kind of solve that problem. But honestly, again, it depends. With this, I feel like probably the easiest way to solve this problem is just to kind of have a go at redrawing it. And what we do is I'm going to sort of start at the center. I'm like, well, it kind of needs to sort of, right, like we kind of need to kind of really be sort of much more over here. And that probably means that this, right, might sort of come out a little bit more. Probably that ring is not drawn well, but I don't think I can really be bothered fixing it. So again, I'm going to get it, you know, like a little bit closer to being okay than it was, but I'm not necessarily going to, you know, go all out and try and sort of fix it. Again, I'm going to put a little sort of shadow under there. Doesn't necessarily make a huge amount of sort of sense that there's just like a small shadow under there. Probably again there would be sort of a larger shadow, right? Maybe something more like that. Again, hard to tell whether we should put that sort of thing in at the line phase. But we'll put it in, we'll see how it goes. If you were really smart, or you cared more about this drawing than I do, you could certainly do that on a separate layer and see how we go. Alright, so again we could try and indicate that dimensionality. What I'm going to do is I'm going to sort of put a bit of shading on here. And I'm just going to sort of make it follow the form, right? Which will kind of help a bit. Again, I'm not going to do this in a crazy, you know, hyper detailed way. All right, just a little bit there. Again, that goes there. Put some shading under that. All right, so hopefully that doesn't look awful. And again, you can see here's another little mistake. That needs to go over there. Needs to come up there. It's going to go over. Like that. Again, this is a huge pain, these rings, right? Just a large amount of structural drawing. And again, you can see here probably I'm like, oh, this one's a bit high. So yeah, don't do that. The other thing I would recommend against is designing a character with an eye patch, because they're so cool. But the number of times I forgot what side her eye patch was meant to be on, and I had to kind of correct it later on. Or, you know, I would sort of just get in the habit of flipping the drawing, right? So I kind of like flip the drawing, play around with it, and then I kind of end up with eye patch on the wrong side. I don't know whether any of them made it. I think maybe there's probably one or two in the book that are on the wrong side. So yeah, not a fun idea, and I'll probably do it again. But yeah, more challenging than I would have thought. All right, so again, let's trace this line down here. Bonk, put that in. And so I'm going to think about there being maybe like one sort of major sort of fold under there in that cloak, and then the rest of it I'm sort of just going to again put in and lose the detail a bit, but I'll just again build up and try and keep a little bit of extra contrast here and there to kind of still give us that feeling of there being some sort of form in there. Now this one comes over here, it's going to come down, so it means again that we got the same thing sort of happening here. And there we go. I think that's pretty much it. Let's get rid of those, see what we've got. Oh, we forgot to put in these. Right, so again, another way you could do this, right, is like just sort of put them in. Now we'll go in with the eraser. Let's make it kind of small, and we'll just kind of erase those out. Sometimes this can be, again, this is fiddly, but it's a more sure way of doing it. Like I'm very confident that that will work, whereas if I sort of, erased it and drew it again, that might actually end up taking longer. So I don't really care as long as it doesn't take too long. All right, so there we go. We've got the got that side of it done. We've got the lines done. So let's jump into the color and we'll see how we go. So we take the lines and I'm going to use the standard quick selection technique that I often play around with. Again, if you're looking for the simplest, easiest way to do this, you can check out the line and color quick start guide that should be in the description below, and that sort of has my sort of general process for doing everything. So you can check that out if you want to sort of get a bit more information about sort of how I handle the selections. But again, in that video, mostly what I'm doing is just sort of saying, hey, if you're new to this, then the most basic process is to just do this by hand. But there are a lot of nice quick ways you can do it, and that's sort of what I'm doing here. I'm going to go into quick mask. And we're going to join these up. Join those up. So yeah, if you want to know my recommendations for, how to sort of handle selections and, like if it, what's sort of easy, if you can't sort of follow along with this, and sort of understand the efficiencies that I'm sort of using here, then it's probably better to just sort of stick with the basic one where we just sort of draw that out by hand. That'll give you a very sort of good result anyway. Yeah, there we go. All right, so now we just can run an action, and that'll separate everything out for us. Okay, so let's play around with some sort of basic color theory. Now, when it comes to choosing colors, I'm a little bit intuitive in the way that I do it. It's one of those things where, I feel like a long time ago, I almost became a comic book colorist, because that was sort of something that I felt like came quite naturally to me. And, I sort of, always was just kind of naturally sort of picking colors, although again, on analysis, now that I know a lot more about color theory and stuff like that, there's a lot of logic to sort of what I'm doing. But my basic advice is to kind of just think about the most basic color theory concept, and that would be initially what's warm and what's cool. So Ara's coloring is basically that she has kind of, fairly Caucasian skin and sort of blonde hair with this kind of blue-gray costume. That's basically the iconic look of it. And so she is warm and sort of bright. And so from a basic compositional standpoint, if we were adding lighting, there's a lot of things we could do if we wanted this to be a lighting-dominant piece. And sort of, play up light and shadow, do a lot of things there. But the main thing to pay attention to is just that, often when I'm doing this sort of quicker style of image, I just want something that I know will work. And what will work here, again, if you kind of have a sort of warm character, is obviously to have a cool background. So, I've made this a bit of a blue, and again, I'll probably sort of tone that down. Again, she's quite bright in her sort of coloration, so having a darker, cooler background is always good. Warm colors come to the front, they come to the fore, and cool colors recede, so having cool colors in the background kind of works anyway. If you had a character whose skin was blue, then and cool, then that might be again its own sort of challenge. But again, wherever the drawing is just going to sort of naturally lead itself down a very sort of sensible road, I kind of let it go there. So again, the basic value scheme, right, or sort of tonal scheme, is that she's going to be fairly light, the background is going to be darker, so that we have contrast between foreground background. We also have warm, cool contrast between foreground and background. I'll probably brighten this skin up in a sec. Again, and so that's like a very simple plan, right? The subject is light, the background is dark, the subject is warm, the background is cool. That will kind of always work. Again, having a warm background can be quite challenging. Your eye is going to be drawn back there naturally. But this will work pretty much all day, every day. So there's no real reason to kind of, change it or play around. So again, here we've got these kind of grays. And again, I just kind of work my way through it. And, the best sort of advice I'd give is to kind of say, well, what do I know, right? What do I know now? Well, I know that, again, I want that there's really only sort of three main colors in her costume. Again, the bright sort of hair. She's got this kind of darker, cool costume on. And again, it's a fairly comic booky design. It's not sort of hyper realistic or anything, and it's also not really colorful. It's a very sort of cartoony but somber color palette. And so I'm just going to say, well, I kind of know that all those things are going to be there. Just a matter of going through and kind of putting them in. And then once I've got those things there, then I'll kind of step back and assess it and look at what I've got. Now, what's not clear is like, well, how bright should the skin be? How dark should the clothing be? How dark should the background be? It is darker than her, but how much darker? Those are things that, again, we can adjust later. And one of the reasons that I'm using, again, the pencil tool here is because that will allow me very easily later on to go and change the colors. Again, I do cover that in detail in the quick start guide that's totally free. You can just sort of download it and learn kind of most of the techniques that I've got going here. And again, if you want more detail, again, just ask me in the comments, and I'll see if I can sort of put together a video to explain something else. One of those things that maybe isn't explained in the quick start guide. If you're seeing a technique that I'm sort of doing that's is not covered there, just let me know, Or, I do have the Line and Color Academy, which is, my sort of full online course that you can grab if, if you're after that sort of, the full experience, where I do sort of break down all those things, in detail, show you exactly like sort of every trick that I use, even for a lot more sort of complicated images than this. But again, the plan is that most of that stuff will, in one way, shape or form, will sort of make its way to the channel. It's just a matter of sort of time. So again, putting in the basics here. Now, the next thing here is just that I've sort of done, right, I've sort of got all these to be, right, like similar sort of values, right? Like it's just the same color. And so what I'm going to try and do is vary that a little bit, right? So I'm going to make her backpack a slightly different sort of tone and temperature to the costume. And just vary it up. But it's all basically just a gray, right? It's the same color. And once that's there and that's kind of working, right? Like, so there's most of that. Let's put in the eye patch. And again, I'm just going to go through and put all of this stuff in, because then I'll be able to make better intuitive decisions once all of that stuff is there. If I try and think too much now about like, well, what color should it be? It's actually a lot easier to do that once I've done the other stuff. Because now I've got a lot of stuff that I already can do, right? I can already do that stuff. I can already sort of put it in. And that gives me something to do. And as long as, again, I've got something to do, I'm kind of happy. When I kind of run out of stuff to do, again, that's where I'll sort of give myself a task. And that's, that's sort of partly, again, advice that I've sort of found to kind of work. But also, those are the things that I've, used in the past to really help me get through those things. Where I'm sitting there, I'm staring at a drawing and being like, I don't know, what do I do? It's like, well, all right, let's one step at a time, right? What do I know? What do I know already? This thing needs to be this color, right? If the grass needs to be green, the trees need to be brown, etc., etc., then, start doing those things. You can always adjust the exact specifics of it later. So again, I'm just lightening up these sort of bits where it sort of attaches to her head. She doesn't look very happy, does she? Well, it is sort of like a dark sword and sorcery fantasy book. So again, these things, I'm going to make them a little bit warmer. So push the saturation up. All right, maybe let's make them a little bit darker. All right, and again, this is not going to change things that much. See if that works. Yep, can fill that. But it does help, right? Just separates things out a little bit. So this is where, again, I'd sort of step back, look at kind of what's there, think about, does this need to change? Right? Does this look any good? And then, I'm like, well, that kind of works. Or at least I feel like the relationship is there. So what we're looking for initially when we sort of put a block in or a series of flat colors there is, do we have a good relationship? Do we have a good start, right? Are things going in a good direction? We can always make things brighter or less bright later on. We can always kind of play around with that. That's quite sort of easy. But again, if you get the relationship, the warm, cool, light, dark right early on, you can always, again, make it a little bit lighter, a little bit darker. But again, if we don't have good foreground, background separation to begin with, then that's sort of tricky. So again, I'm not going to do a lot of rendering. I'm not going to do any rendering. In fact, this is just going to be sort of a flat color thing. But something that can be good, again, if I have put in these cast shadows is, again, maybe to sort of think about putting in, not as an overlay or something, but just as a one-off sort of modification to the color or things that are there in that sort of flat range there. Again, we might do a similar thing here, right? And you could also do a similar thing with the hair, right? I can sort of say, right, let's select. So I'm going to Alt-click the eye. That just gives me that. Right, I'm going to select the hair. That's what I wanted. Contiguous off. That means all hair is selected. Alt-click the eye again. That gives us back what we've got. There probably is a quicker way of doing that, but you know, I've been doing that for a long time, and that sort of is pretty natural to me. And again, I'm just going to put in a bit of color variation there, right? So again, that's just sort of like it's a single shadow, right? It's not. I'm not really, you know, making everything sort of shadowed. I'm not rendering things, but I am making like a distinct separation between that, and that will help. Now, the other thing that we could do there is do the same thing for the the shadows on the cape here, right? Right. Just make these a little bit sort of more shadowed. So again, it's still flat. It's not going to feel like there's any kind of lighting or anything. It's not going to become a form dominant image. It's going to stay a shape flat dominant image, but that does give it some more sophistication. So if we sort of save there and then go back, just flick those on and sort of give you an idea of what I'm sort of talking about. Right, so again, that's sort of without those things. And then if I sort of turn them on, right, just adding, right, off, on, just added that little extra bit of sophistication. Hopefully that will, again, will kind of like help us. Now, what I want to talk a little bit about in this tutorial, right, and again, a reason I'm kind of, doing this and making it fairly simple is to talk about simple things you can do to very, very quickly get an interesting effect. And again, this is something I talk about in the quick start guide and all the courses I sort of do. I'm going to use gradients as a technique, and again, I'm going to use them as gradients, but I'm actually going to use a big airbrush because that's actually a bit more sophisticated way of creating a gradient. Now again, what we're after is some color sophistication, but I'm going to start by just kind of using a big old gradient with black. So I've got the big airbrush. I've set the opacity quite low to sort of 20. You can see the flow is actually down to sort of 30% as well. And I've just got a new layer in the layer stack above the flats, right? So I can turn this off and on, right? And I'm basically just going to think about, from a compositional standpoint, I want the focus to be on the face, right? That's really sort of all we're doing here, right? So again, and I'm actually going to try and erase out a little bit more of that sort of gradient stuff around the chest area, right? So again, we sort of have focus on the face, right, and the chest sort of around there. And the other things will get a little bit sort of darker. Right. So again, I can sort of push this a little bit sort of further if we want. I'm just gonna try and leave it very sort of subtle. So what we've basically got, if I turn this off, on, is some very, very subtle gradients. Now we can do the same thing in the background, right? I'm just going to use, right, sort of black. Except here I'm going to increase the contrast sort of around her sort of face, right? So we increase that sort of contrast to bring out the head a little bit. Now again, that's just a little bit of sort of visual interest. The next thing I'm going to do is, again, add some texture. So make a new layer, again with my shortcut, and I'm going to select, where are we? Right, so here again, I'm just going to use one of these sort of scatter brushes. And I have a video on texture you can check out in the channel if you haven't already, that sort of talks about some of what I'm doing here. But yeah, just going to add that sort of texture there. And again, low opacity. And that's just going to make it feel like, look, it's not flat anymore. Let's make that a little bit darker. So I'm just overlaying some different types of texture. Some lighter, some darker. And that's really going to sort of blend in there, right? And now if we zoom up, we've got, it's quite a sophisticated look. And I just waved the brush around for 5 seconds. And that's sort of what we got, right? So we can do the same thing on the character. I'm going to make a new layer with a shortcut key there. And again, just with sort of, again, a really good trick here is I'm going to blend the background in with the character. So again, I'm going to pick that kind of darker blue, and I'm going to use that to kind of, again, do a very similar little pass. Again, I'm actually going to turn the opacity down to 10% using shortcut keys. I'm just going to go over the character. I'm basically just going to go over everywhere, right? And you can see that sort of gives me, right, a bit of that sort of textured look. And then I'm actually going to select the skin color, right, and I'm going to do the same thing. So again, this just sort of homogenizes those colors a bit, right? If we pick the hair color, right, push the face a little bit. Again, it's just sort of blending things together. Something you can also do is, over the top of all of the lines and everything, right, is we can sort of paint the background and the subject into each other a little bit, right? And again, sometimes we'll go a little bit sort of far with that. That's where, again, I might use the airbrush, right, sort of pull some of those areas out. But yeah, so there you can see, again, I've got kind of, if we zoom up, you can see there is some sort of really subtle sort of texture there. And again, we can sort of keep playing around with that. You could potentially, again, setting down to 10%, so it's very subtle. We could sort of paint some of that skin texture into the background as well. That will kind of really, right, make it a little bit sort of flatter. Now, obviously, after this, we need to kind of bring it out a little bit, right? We need to add a little bit more contrast back in. And before that, though, I'm going to talk about the next step that we can do to create a lot of interest quickly is through color adjustments, right? So again, I don't really need to color adjust that much. I'm just going to, again, do an emphasis of the warm and cool in the image. So I always use the selective color here. And so we're going to go neutrals. And right, what I'm going to do is kind of just maybe push the warms, right? So I'm going to push the warms. Right, I'm going to reduce the cyan, which basically gives me the red sort of there, and I'm going to reduce the magenta, which gives me a slightly greener. I'm not going to push the yellow because I don't want that kind of heavy saturation there, but again, that's the difference there. And what I'm going to try and do is sort of just apply that to the skin. So to select color range, I'm going to have localized color clusters, and just going to basically sort of punch the face there. And then we can sort of push that fuzziness. Now you can see that because it's sort of localized color clusters, right? If we turn that off, right, it's going to sort of affect everything equally. But what this is doing is it's sort of modifying the colors and the tone, like very much relative to those gradients that I put in. So, right, and again, what we'll do is we readjust those colors because I'm not 100% sure they're kind of working. But you can see now, again, I've got a color shift between the face, right, and the arm. So that's really important to understand, is I've sort of got that for free. Now again, I think that might be a bit sort of extreme, but we can sort of play around with that here, right, and just kind of keep pushing those sliders until they kind of feel right. So again, if we undo what I did, redo, yeah, I mean, I think that's kind of working a little bit sort of better. feel like it's doing a weird thing with that cheek. I feel like I just want to sort of erase that. All right. So again, you can see that I've used those sort of gradients, right? And the gradients are giving me a lot of color variation for free. So now I'm going to readjust the neutrals, but I'm going to basically sort of do it in the opposite direction, right? So make them more blue, and then I'm going to hit the blacks, and I'm going to, again, punch the cyan up a tiny bit, punch the magenta up a little bit. Now, if we go select color range, I'm just going to select the sort of the darker sort of elements, right? We'll increase the sort of the fuzziness, right? So we've sort of got the background. Now I can turn off localized. Right, let's zoom out, see sort of what's going on. Right, so there again, we just sort of, if I sort of look at that, it's just making all of these sort of bluer, darker colors, right? Like a little bit more blue, right? So again, here's where if we turn them off, right? That's sort of what we had. I turn them on, and that's what we've got now. Now again, is this the best effect? Well, look, yeah, not necessarily, not, you know, it's not the most interesting thing. Now I can see here there's a bit too much kind of color, value contrast on that sort of texture. So I'm finding, oh, where's that layer, right? And I'm just going to kind of, all right, I'm just going to sort of take that, right? Just take that sort of back a bit. Just play around with the subtlety, but that's basically the idea, is that I've just sort of put in the colors in a relatively flat way. I've added a few gradients using a very simple color theory, right, which is just, it's black. I'm just creating a value contrast there. And then once we sort of add some color via selections to that, we then get some color variation. And again, I like doing the color variation and the color adjustments when I'm stepped back in an editing sort of mindset. You know, and here's where, again, you can sort of start playing around with stuff. So a really good way to sort of think about this is, firstly, what I'm actually going to do is get the right selection there. So what I'm going to do is play around with the color of the background, which I think is kind of a little bit of sort of neutrals and a little bit of sort of darks, right? So it doesn't really matter what color we do initially, but let's say, right, I really kind of adjust the colors and make them very different. This will just show us where the color is being placed. Now if I do the same thing, but I'm just going to put the eyedropper on the background there, you can see it's kind of selecting that. Again, if we sort of turn that on, right, you can see it's kind of, right, it's got that background there now. Which again is kind of interesting, but that's not obviously the color I want. So let's select that color adjustment. Let's reset that, and let's have another go, right? So again, I can now play around with, oh, let's maybe make it a little bit more sort of blue or green or whatever, you know, and you can certainly play around with, right, these things. You can also take the black out of it, right, or put the black in, right, if we really wanted to sort of push add a little bit more contrast. And once you've sort of adjusted that, if you do want to kind of keep pushing things, you can play around with doing that. But again, adding these color adjustments might take me a few minutes. Other things you can still do is, obviously I've still got this selection here because I created it with those lines. I could just, let's make a new layer. Let's make a mask out of that. And big airbrush, right? We can just, see if we can kind of push. Oh, that's just set to normal. Let's do like overlay. That's kind of what I was sort of thinking there, right? We can just sort of push that, add a bit of, right, sort of emphasis, right? Bring that out. I could again do overlay with black there as well, right? Just kind of increase the the contrast, if I sort of wanted. So again, you can play around with these things, add a little bit of drama, right? Like pull out the areas that you want. And again, once I've sort of got all of those things kind of working, again, I feel like this stuff's like, this is a little bit extreme. Let's just reduce the opacity of that overall. Then again, I'll often just sort of, play around with the colors in general, and think about how we can tweak them. And lastly, again, something we can do is just sort of adjust the levels, right? Play around with, making things a little bit more contrasty, right? Push the values around a little bit, whatever you desire. But again, it's a very simple image to begin with, right? So it's not like, this is needing a lot of sort of tweaking. A lot of the images I do, require like a lot of sort of fiddling around and stuff. So, if it's a complicated image, you might need to do a lot of that stuff. And again, then what I will do is, just sort of play around with, are these things making it better or worse? Again, I'm not 100% convinced that's actually making it better. Yeah, not 100% sure about that. I mean, I feel like it kind of works fine like it is. I'm going to decouple the lines there. And another thing I often do like doing is just sort of to duplicate those lines a bit. Maybe reduce the opacity of those. Right. Again, just feel like some of the lines on the periphery on the outside could be a bit darker. But yeah, again, that's pretty much it. Then I'll kind of think about where I want to put the, put that sort of signature. We can turn on some sort of grain overall. And that gives us, again, a very, very simple, very, very simple image. Other things that you could do, right, again, if there's like a little bit too much contrast in places, right, I really do think, just pushing the background into the character a little bit is a really good sort of easy, simple way to sort of push the image together a bit, especially, again, if you're sort of finding that, stuff is kind of a little bit contrasty, right, just kind of like blending it together a little bit. Can be really sort of useful, right? Because again, I kind of want to focus on this eye. So again, if we turn that off, you can see, again, it's just sort of pushing us a little bit towards her, right? Her sort of open eye there. And again, that can be sort of what I kind of want. Yeah. So again, simple idea, simple sort of technique. Again, you can keep playing around with those sort of adjustments, but yeah, the basic idea there is just, flat color plus a gradient plus a bit of texture. Again, you don't need the texture if that's not stylistically what you're after, but flat color plus simple gradient. Again, you don't need to think about the color theory of the gradient. Then if you add the color adjustment plus that select color range, it gives you a lot of ability to get sophisticated color in sort of seconds, right? And again, it's very sort of progressive and easy to sort of manage. So that's why I do it that way. Again, anytime I can get sort of a simple effect quickly, and again, it's also something that's repeatable, then, I'll do it. But that's it. That's all I got for now. If you're interested in this type of line and color illustration style, check out the free quick start guide. That just goes over the basic processes that I use here. It also talks a little bit more about sort of composition and how I think about putting images together. But again, very, very sort of similar tutorial, just a little bit more sort of analytical. And again, that also gives you access to all of the brushes and those other sort of elements there that make up this particular image. So anyway, thanks for watching. That's all I got. Happy drawing. Catch you later.